Askreddit, what's the most insane true crime story you've heard of? Oliver Town. Around 50 years ago, a guy held up a bank in Kenora, Ontario. He handed the bank teller a note asking for all the money. A large amount of explosives was strapped around his chest, and a detonator was clenched between his teeth. He walked out the front door of the bank, where a large group of people were gathered, tripped, and the explosives went off. They were never able to identify the man, so they gave him the nickname Oliver Town. All over town. The Ryan Waller story is wild. He was interrogated for allegedly killing his girlfriend while he had a bullet visibly lodged in his face. He kept telling the cops he was a victim and shot, but they didn't believe him. Instead of getting him medical help, they kept questioning him, and the delay left him with permanent brain damage. Prime example of police negligence. Ryan suffered from that neglect for a decade. He was left with frequent seizures, and in January 2016, he had a seizure that ultimately killed him. He died at 27, about 3-ish weeks before his birthday. The cops tortured and harassed him for over 6 hours. At one point, the cop in the room with him checked his obvious injuries, but deemed them fine, and continued to abuse this poor boy. Ken Rex McElroy. Town, bully, red, thief, murderer, rapist, pedophile. Constantly got away with his crimes by intimidating witnesses, victims, and law enforcement with credible violent threats, as he was a large man and armed. One day, after yet again getting off light with a crime he committed and threatening another citizen, he gets murdered in broad daylight by 2 separate gunshots from different guns in his car right next to his wife, in a crowd of 30+ people. To this day, not a single person has been connected to committing the killing. Where we live, the Harvey murders. 2 men randomly picked a house. Went in, tied up mom and dad and young daughter in the basement. But other young daughter was spending the night and was being dropped off. Mom had to go to the door to get the daughter and do so without giving away what was happening. Under threat of harm to the others. It was for nothing. The men killed them all brutally and tried to set the basement on fire. It traumatized our city. Wonderful family, well known and loved. Taken away by a pair of criminal monsters. The Ken and Barbie, Homolka and Bernardo, murders in Canada in the 90s. Incest, SA, kidnapping, domestic abuse and murder are bad enough, but it just gets worse and worse. That Karla Homolka walks free today is an absolute travesty. Arson investigator busted for decade-long string of fires that he'd light on a road trip every year to an arson investigation conference. Craziest part is when he finally got caught, he was writing a book about an arson investigator who was secretly an arson. There's an episode of Forensic Files about it called Point of Origin. But that's not the craziest part. When he was arrested, the investigators only knew of a handful of fires started by an arsonist. After his arrest, brush fires in the surrounding area dropped by 90%. That's just an insane amount of fires that weren't on anyone's radar. It's estimated the dude set more than 2,000 fires, making him the most prolific serial arsonist in American history. Casey Anthony, I still cannot listen to any true crime episode about that case. It infuriates me. This. What gets me so much about this case is the insane amount of lies and fabrications this woman told. It's so aggravating. This lady claimed to be a Universal Studio employee and was so committed to her lies that when investigators asked to accompany her to her office, she actually led them around aimlessly before finally admitting that she didn't work there. Like, what kind of delusional person does that? Are you just expecting by some freak miracle you'll find an office with your name on the door? No. That is when you admit you've been lying. Golden State Killer / Irons is pretty insane. Literally hundreds of victims. Disappeared like a ghost. Caught hiding in plain sight 40 years later using genealogical DNA. Perp was on nobody's suspect list. What do you think is the craziest true crime story you've heard? Feel free to share in the comments below. Please consider subscribing, liking, and for more daily content.